Welcome back to another episode of Logistics Remix. Today's guest helped digitize the post office long before e-commerce became a household word. Now, he's a legend in the industry, and I'm honored to have him on my podcast. Amine Khechfé is a seasoned senior executive and thought leader with 35 plus years expertise in e-commerce, SaaS, logistics, shipping software, and management consulting. Amine was the co-founder and president of Endicia until its acquisition by Stamps.com in 2015, and then as the Stamps.com and later Octane chief strategy officer. He was focused on new innovations, new markets, new geographies, global postal carrier relationships, M&A, until he retired from the company in 2023. Amine currently serves as a board of directors and provides executive advisory and mentoring for companies such as OTO Global, Shipping, SendCloud, Ship Hero, SkyDropX, and Tusk Logistics, amongst others. Amine, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome. Well, I know it took us some time to get this all scheduled between travel, etc., but it is so worth it. I was very excited to have you on the pod and excited for this conversation. I think we're going to have some fun. I do want to start, though, at the beginning, kind of, right? So I want to start this conversation with your early days. You studied at Worcester Polytechnic Institute and then Stanford. So I wanted to kind of know what were you studying? Like, what kind of problems did you want to work on when you graduated?
Yeah, it wasn't shipping. Let me put it that way, right? It was mechanical engineering. And so really the takeaway that connects is we solve problems. The bigger thing at Stanford is it's where I met my co-founder, Harry Whitehouse, Dr. Harry Whitehouse, actually. He was my professor of my last class at Stanford, and it was in solar energy. So go figure, right? And so, and then like a year later, after Stanford's when we got together, and we started in the energy world, but that's not what lasted, right? We really took away solving problems and finding innovative ways to solve things, and which led us eventually down the road. So not your typical start, but then half of us don't start in the typical world, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You study something and then you go do something completely different when you start. But I think what you just said was you had that connection that you made with the professor. And I think that is kind of how the journey started. So I think, after college, I think you went to join your professor, right? As we talked previously, at a company called PSI. And that was before the company even embarked on what we'll talk about as the transition to Endicia. So tell me about those early days. Like, how did you join the firm and kind of what problems were you solving? Curious kind of on how that got started.
Yeah, so when I finished Stanford, I actually went to work for AT&T for all of 10 months. But I had TA'd for Harry while I was a student in the class, which is a totally different story, but being a TA and a student in the same class. So we got to know each other really well. So when I left, moved to New Jersey, I get a call like in the middle of winter. Hey, what do you think of coming back? Remember that little consulting company I had on the side? It's growing. He already had hired our third co-founder, who was also a Stanford student, Scott Montgomery. And so I'd loved working with him on this project I did when I was grad school. They had a one-room office in downtown Palo Alto where I would go grade papers. And I did a project in addition to my schoolwork. And so moved back 10 months later, and we thought we were going to do management consulting, energy analysis. That lasted all of 6 months. And but that was our start. And the three of us really got along very well. And so even though the first line of business didn't really work out, it really cemented the fact that the three of us wanted to work together. So that was really the start. And I think we lasted 7 or 8 months with the consulting, the energy consulting. We drifted a little bit after that. So
interesting. So it sounds like you had a business model in mind, and then you pivoted. It's just such a common story, right? Companies early days working on something, then you find another problem and you pivot. Was that the pivot to starting Endicia? And you talk about kind of
we pivoted a few times.
Talk about that evolution. Like, what were these pivots? Like, it sounds like maybe there was more than one.
We did really well at pivoting. Let's just put it that way. So actually what happened is our engineering work happened to be with the Postal Service, was one of our clients. We did energy analysis when I was a student at Stanford. My project was doing an energy analysis at a post office, because the buildings are not your unique buildings that you can just, figure out the energy load and what kind of air conditioning it needs, what kind of heating it needs, because the buildings are structured differently. So you have to really model it. So I was also computer modeling early in the days. You'd run these programs that would run overnight. Computing power was very different back then. And so that's what got us connected to the post office. And then when the energy part didn't work, the engineers we worked with valued the fact that when they put out a proposal for us to do engineering work, we'd get back to them so fast that they were curious what we were doing. So we had automated some project management estimations, and they sort of liked that. They said, can you build these tools for us? So that transitioned into multi 3 to 5 year agreements with the facilities department, the Postal Service, to build management, call them like project management software, estimating software, accounting software, things that the day-to-day engineers, so we understood engineering, we were good problem solvers. And so that was our management consulting transition. We did that with them. We did that with the engineers at the Navy. We ended up doing it because of project management. We did case management with the courts, public defender offices. We ended up doing like a graduate system for Berkeley, a whole bunch of scheduling, accounting, all those kind of ERP systems. And the one at the Postal Service was huge because it was around the nation. They handled 40,000 post offices, $5 billion budget a year. So in that process, we got to know the Postal Service, and they were bringing in these big equipment inside post offices. And we helped them also build a CAD system, which was computer design, to lay out post offices. So this big piece of equipment was one of the early barcode readers. And so we were curious what it did. And in doing that, we came up with the idea of helping people get zip codes. Back in the day, you literally had these huge books to look up a zip code. Or you'd call the post office, literally say, here's my address, can you give me a zip code? So I think this is the 80s now. So we came up with a system. There used to be you could buy this very expensive CD. So we took this CD, put a server around it, did a dial-up, 80s, 90s, no internet yet, right? Patented the heck out of it. And that became, by the way, common address validation over dial-up lines, which got us the zip code. Then we came to print it, thinking, just print it on an HP printer. Turns out there were no fonts back then to print a barcode. So we created one of the first soft fonts to download to the printer to print a zip code. Harry was the overnight inventor. He was always the PhD inventor. And so one of our first actually patent is on looking up zip codes. And so we did the server zip code, printed the barcode. We're like, hey, if we print the barcode, might as well print the address. So we printed the address. And then we said, well, let's print an envelope. So we created the first software product was Envelope Manager. Three engineers naming a product, right? And so we printed the envelope, return address, made it look nice. Then we printed on labels and we printed on formats. And then we printed it, and then you'd have to go get a stamp. Or you'd have to go put it in a meter. We're like, that's silly. We now have these great PCs. Why don't we print postage? Well, it turns out you just can't do that. You're printing money. If you go ever look up postage, there's a whole currency law that you're printing currency. So we patented that and patented doing it over dial-up lines, any lines, which turns out the internet allowed us. So we had one of the first patents on printing postage over media versus a fixed meter or fixed franking machine. And it took us about 7 years to have the Postal Service approve that concept. So here we are in our early 90s. We're a 7-person company only. We go present it to the Postal Service. We got laughed at. So we partnered with other people in the industry to advance the concept. By then, other companies got funded. By 99, Postal Service approves it. Several companies are working on it. We come to launch. Everybody was thinking of envelopes at the time, right? That was really the world. Shipping was, but a little company called eBay was 20 minutes from my house. We looked at what they were doing. We're like, envelopes are cool, but now you can buy stamps online. Now the internet, you can buy stamps online. Why would we do this thing why do people stand in line in the post office? They were getting a tracking number, weighing their package, buying postage, buying a tracking number that you had to tape on a package. So we said, that looks like a hard thing to solve. Let's solve that. So we solved that within 3 months, launched our product, we're about 4 times the price of our next competitor, and it took off. And we basically served the eBay customers. And then obviously it's history from there. We grew completely. The 3 founders, we basically just continued growing the business, and that's the launch of Endicia.
So what was the total, you mentioned some 7-year time frame. What was the total time frame between you joining this consulting firm to you stumbling on, I'll call it, or innovating this product where eBay shippers could print their own labels?
About 13 years, because I think May 87 is when when I joined Harry and Scott, I should say. Because I remember flying out red eye over Memorial Day and starting really literally that Tuesday after Memorial Day. And then, we had our management consult, our energy phase, which lasted about a year, management consulting, 5-6 years. And that continued, by the way, till the mid 2000s, even after Endicia. We took a while to wind that down. Became about a $2.5 million business. And then we had our envelope manager business, which are direct mail. We worked with Microsoft for a while, had a white label with them. Had a small business direct mail. Like if you want a church group sending out 200 things, getting postal discounts. So we did that while we were waiting for this concept of postage to be approved. Because the cryptography hadn't caught up with the concept yet. You didn't have those strong encryption that would allow you to print postage. So as technology evolved, and its acceptance evolved. Plus, there was some market changes which allowed the Postal Service to look at this as a fraud prevention as opposed to some of the fraud they were already having. So we had a couple of market changes that made it also more viable. And then, of course, the commercialization came. eBay, was it 99, 2000, right? You start seeing eBay come out.
I do want to talk about that. I want to ask you about the eBay, because obviously they created a product that just took off, right? And the e-commerce was born, right? I think this was like mid 90s, right? Internet, people started getting access to Internet Explorer, Netscape Navigator, eBay, etc. And so, talk to me about that. I'm kind of curious about that. Sounds like you were like, did you go in the post office, see someone holding a box, and say, "Hey, what are you doing? What are you shipping? Who are you shipping to? Oh, you sold that on eBay." Like, how did the eBay, I guess, connection start?
Well, multiple levels. One was, the .com crash starts, right? You have to think of the timing. And we're scrappy, we're self-funded. So now we're looking for ways to buy stuff, right? Harry especially loved buying stuff on eBay, but we bought servers. We bought, there was the demise of some big companies where you could buy these massive servers for 10 cents on the dollar, right? And so being scrappy, we bought, A-level equipment for, 10 cents on the dollar. So that was one aspect of eBay, the buyer part. Now, we also sent stuff. So if we walked in at the post office, we'd end up back offline with all these other people. So being social and conversationalist, Harry especially had the first concept because he was the big buyer. And then we all sort of started looking, why are these people in the post office? And you start seeing the part-time sellers, the part-time moms holding a baby while a baby falls asleep. I can't stand the line. I better go back home. So there was this problem. And when you solve a problem, then you have a value, right? And so that concept of, you're going to buy postage. And we have a concept of printing postage. So we already had that concept. So already we had problem A, right? And we're already going through approval process. Problem B was a tracking number. You bought a tracking number. There were already people inside the Postal Service looking at, can that be electronic? So we found the places that would do that, found the methodology which allowed you to do a tracking number. But remember, back in the late 90s, Postal Service for shipping wasn't only, but was mostly consumer driven, right? So I like to think we were part of the evolution of that commercial use of the Postal Service. And then the other thing was, we quickly, within 6-7 months, also came up with a concept. Back then, shippers made money on shipping, right? It was definitely a markup. And so UPS and FedEx would also hide the postage amount. You just didn't have it. So Postal Service was always on there. So we also came up with a concept that we called stealth postage or hidden postage, where you didn't have the postage amount, but you'd had everything that described it enough so that you knew if it was weighed correctly, paid correctly. And then the last thing was really international. As we looked at why people stood in line, the other thing was customs forms. So early, back in 2001, we even automated customs forms. It still looked big and stuff. It took us 6-7 years to convince everybody to be able to do customs forms on small labels. And we worked with folks at the Postal Service who were really forward thinkers about how to, really serve the e-commerce shipper. But the concept was we literally saw that. And then we met with eBay. We knew eBay sellers. We went to the first eBay conference when it was only 15 booths. There was about 5-6 years where eBay had their annual seller conference before they went regional. And so with that, the collaboration, we were online. There's also forums. There was an online shipping forum at eBay, and Amazon had something similar. And so we would answer questions. We started becoming a little bit of that thought leader, experts online. And between all the feedback, but the 3 or 4 features were the key things we did. And then the concept was use existing equipment. Because back then you had a lot of closed systems. So we looked at what UPS and FedEx had. They had 4x6 labels. So, hey, Postal Service, you should print on 4x6 labels. So we created those formats and eventually got them approved. Early in the day, we have a fun story. The tracking number used to have to go buy it for, let's say, 40, 45 cents, whatever it was. It was a green label. You bought the tracking number and then it had a sticky and you stuck it on the package. If you went to the post office counter. So the first time our shippers would use it, sometimes it would get rejected because the Postal Service would say, it's not green. Because the orange was something else, the red was something, whatever it was, right? So we had a FAQ that used to say, highlight it in green. These are the early days of e-commerce shipping, right? And so it's kind of interesting. We went through all those stages, but basically, suddenly you had testimonials of customers who would say, oh my God, I no longer have to stand in line. My baby fell asleep in the car. All I had to do was drive at the back of the Postal Service, and they took my packages because they're already pre-weighed, prepaid, ready to ship. You don't have to go to the counter. Or if you went to the counter, you just dropped them off. You didn't have to stand in line, right?
Exactly.
So that was the buzz around us launching, and that was what came around from the early days of that concept that had us really looking at a new, relatively, even though people shipped before, it was a brand new way of shipping.
Absolutely. And you know what? You're solving real problems, right? Yeah. And what's interesting is it was a kind of grassroots, right? You found you found the problem, solved it. People started talking about the solution. I think the forums, they probably are still very strong. I think eBay sellers are pretty famous for exchanging information inside their forums and discussing kind of, tools, best practices, challenges, etc. And so you were able to ride that wave.
Yeah. And we lent our voice to solving problems. We tried not to sell, right? And I think we were very careful. And there was definitely a protocol that we respected a lot. We're very fortunate to also have, there was I don't know if they still have it now, but there was eBay University where they would teach classes. 2 out of the 3 eBay for University instructors started including us in their class. Within the first or second edition, maybe, or something, eBay for Dummies had a section on us. Very fortunate to have the author use our software. Marcia Collier, I remember, back then Auction Bites, today e-commerce bites, right? The early days of those newsletters online. We collaborated with a lot of those because we were all the early folks into the market, into the world of eBay, the eBay sellers, the different niches within eBay. So
it was kind of a Wild West at the time, right? I mean, if you recall those days, everyone was trying to figure out what to do, how to do it. And, you didn't have like the big companies that we have today that already have done the software over and over for many years. But even in those early days before you really took off, and I think in speaking with you earlier, there's always you told me a story, and and it reminds me there's always like this almost like inches away from shutting down a company's story, right? And I think this one involved, I think, Post Office or eBay. Can you speak to that? I'd love to hear because everyone thinks it's a straight line to the right, in entrepreneurship, but the reality is it's up and down. And you had one of those down moments. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, I like to call them A-B. We make a lot of A-B choices along the way. And sometimes they're, driven by pain, sometimes by gain. Sometimes you make the right choice, the wrong choice, but you keep making them and you have to go forward. And I think we were fortunate to make a lot of good decisions along the way. But there was always obstacles. And if you looked at each obstacle, it might shut you down. A couple of stories we had. Postal Service one is actually quite interesting because the concept of PC postage, electronic postage, was called PC postage, was for letters. I mean, that if you really think in 99, 98, 2000, 2001, it was a technology for letters. We took it, applied it to parcels. I remember getting I call them nasty grams, an official letter with letterhead saying we were not compliant and that we had to stop basically printing shipping labels. That this was not a use of the technology, it was intended for SMBs, and we had to go wrestle with that. Luckily, we had enough inside people in the Postal Service that were like, wait a minute, this is good revenue for us. Why is there something wrong here? But it shook the process, folks. And I mean, everybody came to their senses. We had a slight fight, I wouldn't say fight, but a good back and forth, especially we were still 30, 40 people. You realize this started inside our office, right? We had servers, but we took off like crazily to the point that we had venting out of the roof because we couldn't even move fast enough. So, I mean, it was a huge growth and it took the market, but we had these regulatory aspects that we had to adjust with, that we were going faster than the regulations were. So one was, hey, you're using it incorrectly. This is not licensed for parcels and this is not a parcel technology. We have approved parcel technologies. This is not one of them. We went through that, did that. The other thing really interesting, which today's world wouldn't recognize, is you buy a $5 label, right? Priority mail back then, $5, let's say. It was actually $2.90, I think, but whatever. You pay that, and the customer, the merchant, uses their Visa card. Say you buy $50 worth of those labels. There's a 2 or 3% fee that gets paid, right? Just a credit card fee. Postal Service was covering that fee because it was their customer. We didn't make money on anything in the shipping back then. And so all of a sudden we're getting these bills that are like, you're costing us money. We're like, yeah, but it's your business. We're just a channel. And that took about 4 years to resolve. And we had 7-figure bills from the Postal Service that we at one point or another came to a compromise, but they were not let go, but it was a while. That one almost shut us down. That one there was legal aspects. That one had a lot of tentacles that we resolved. Once they resolved, again, the business took off, but we had 3 or 4 years worth of very, very contentious issues that we had to resolve because the payments got big. We were dealing with all of a sudden $100 million worth of shipping, then all of a sudden $1 billion worth of shipping. And all of a sudden you get a bill for 2%. That's a big number when your whole revenue wasn't that big, right? Because we were making 10 or 20 bucks, $10 or $16 a month SaaS fees. And our shippers were doing $1,000. So they were 2% of that, 3% of that is 30 bucks. So it was more than what we made. And so that took a while to resolve. That was probably our most dangerous one in my history. Sure. And I remember the days we stayed up at night for that one.
Oh, I'm sure it wasn't easy to go through. At what point did you realize, hey, we are taking off? Like, this is really working. Like this is going to be a big business.
The first year, it was amazing, Timur, to just see the way people spoke about it, the enthusiasm, and especially, the online voices were loud. We went to our first eBay show. We didn't even have money for a booth at the time. So I remember Steve Rifai went and bought a whole bunch of boxes and we taped them. We had a backdrop and we shared the booth with an insurance company back then, UPIC. And we had people out in the aisles. And I'll always remember eBay sellers who knew our product really well started giving demos on our behalf in the aisleways. And I always remember, I think her name was Margie Smith, the head of the eBay Users Disabled Association. I'm missing a word there. Lily in her wheelchair giving demos to customers. It was amazing for us, the amount of customers that were just finding this was revolutionary for them. This was saving them an hour a day. This was allowing them to sell longer and drop off stuff. And it took away time and effort and professionalism. And suddenly you had tracking. You had electronic tracking. We even integrated that way ahead of everybody else. And so that amount of enthusiasm, and it translated immediately to signups. I mean, there was no in between, right? I mean, we from year one, we never had less than a 50% growth per year for 8 years. And it never, I mean, we had 1 year was 45 followed by a 65. Year 7 was a 45% growth. The year after that got 65. So it was just, and immediately you saw it. And like year 1, it was customers. Years 2, we wanted partnerships, right? And I remember we'd go to the auction management companies back then. We'd talk to them and they were like, oh, we're too busy trying to get images in the system and inventory. You know, the other stuff that today is table stakes was back then all new. So we had one partner from an eBay ecosystem that integrated us. And at that time, I remember the CTO co-founder blasted a blog about how, oh my God, where has this company been? It's fantastic. Everybody else can go aside. This is our best partnerships. By year 3, people who had said no to us were coming to us, can we pay you to integrate? We're like, no, just integrate. You know, we were the first also to create a poor man's API and then a real API because we felt that was a good expansion because we weren't going to build images or auction management at the time. And so, yeah, we had every year, we had a huge step function in growth. So we kept up one with partnerships, expanding market reach, APIs for partners. We went into expanding the operating systems because Windows, web still wasn't robust for the bigger shippers. We had a small thing, we had an API, then we had a Mac version of our software through a partnership, which that in it alone took off its own, curve. And so every year we would add, I'm going to call it a step function, a market segment, a operating system, a something major that allowed us to continue for 3 years after that, whatever we would launch. And so that really kept going. And so, but from the beginning, there was no turning back. It just took off.
And by the way, at the beginning, it's like 13 years after you started working at PSI.
Yeah. I mean, this would be about 2000. I think 2001, I start counting that 50%.
So it's like an overnight success after 13 years.
Yeah. It takes perseverance, right? It takes patience.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't all hit at once. Some may get lucky, but it sounds like in your case, you were in the right place in the right time. And you found that product market fit. And I think that's like what's really important these days, right? For any startup, anyone that's looking to grow at 50%, that's not easy to grow. No, like not many companies are growing 50% year over year for 8 years. Very few. I think there's very few. And product market fit, you had it, right? Would you say? Well, I think you had it. You tell me.
We also listened, it is product market fit, but also listening to the customers. We really were customer point of view, even from looking at them in the post office, we always, Harry and then myself liked going out to customers. Very humbling, by the way, when somebody uses your software, you go into a eBay seller on the kitchen floor packaging, right? Or you go into, as we grew, into some of the garages to warehouses, right? I remember visiting a customer once and they didn't get their pickup, loading up boxes in the back of my rental, right? And taking them down to the post office. I remember our vacations, my in-laws lived in Wisconsin. Every vacation, they knew I'd had one day I was going to go do visit with the local sales office for the Postal Service and go do visits. Until we had our own sales team, it wasn't until year 8 that we had our own sales team, outside sales team. So I loved traveling, going to visit. I'd always look up a zip code, find out 3 customers, and literally walk in. I'd carry a nice Endicia shirt, give a little value, talk with the customer. I've had anybody from, aren't you from California? What are you doing here? To a shrieking, like, Price is Right. Oh my God, you came all the way here. But I love that. Love going in, always asking, how to use, oh no, don't change anything. I love what I do, but why are you doing this thing manually? Oh, it's okay. Don't worry. It's okay. I'm like, no, but we can do better. And getting these ideas, having that ear to the customer, helped us throughout our growth. So.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about listening to your customers.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you were right there. You weren't just sitting behind the desk writing the code. You were right there. You wanted to visit them. You wanted to see what improvements you can make, or at least hear that it's working. So you did mention international as well. And so I wanted to touch on this because I had AJ Hernandez, CEO of SkyPostal, on this podcast, and he said that Endicia partnership that you had with his company, SkyPostal, was really a key milestone for their growth in Latin American delivery. Do you remember that collaboration?
Yeah.
And tell the story from this side, because I heard AJ's story. I would love to hear your side of the story.
Yeah. Hey, love AJ. Got to meet him and his late father, Albert, who was really, and I think I listened to part of the podcast with AJ, and his father's story is very, very strong as a pioneer in
Yes.
Latin America shipping. And so as we grew, as I mentioned to you, every year we looked for something new to, what can we fix? What can we do better? What are our customers telling us? So we had hired a very bright gentleman, Shea Felix, who came to us from the Postal Service, but he was also a local guy from the Silicon Valley. Gone to school out here. His mom lived out here, but he had moved to DC as a consultant, then as a director at the Postal Service International. We had worked with him on automating forms. At one point he left. We hired him to basically focus on our international outbound business to start, but we also had inbound international and then whether international countries. But so he had sat and had the focus time to look at data. This is us now getting a step. Now we're getting more professional. Now we're starting to look at data insights, right? And he came to us. He had a lot of ideas and put out a roadmap. But the unique thing, he came to us says, look, I looked at Brazil volumes, and they're down 50% over the last 3 years. I'm like, wow, it was hidden because we were still growing the whole business. But he was able to find that part. And he said, it intrigued me because everything else is growing. And so he dug deeper. And one of the insights was it took like 35 days for a parcel to get from the US to Brazil. And he dug deeper, and it took about 12 to 15 days sitting in customs. So there you have a problem, right? What are we? We're problem solvers. So as we looked at the market, SkyPostal, AJ's company, had basically a product where they clear shipments into Brazil. But it wasn't intended for small sellers, right? It just wasn't. He also used software from a partner of ours who was integrated with us that would print the destination shipping labels in their warehouse in Miami. They'd print like Brazilian labels, put them in a container and send them into Brazil. So together we came up with the idea, an SMB sitting in New York or in Chicago or anywhere, when they come to print a package, print a shipping label, going to Brazil. Instead, we printed the domestic label to Miami, but collected all the information, the customs information, what the product was, just like you would have a customs form, but they didn't have to deal with the customs form. The data got transferred to nightly, or I think it was nightly, to SkyPostal. When that box arrived at their warehouse with a priority mail label or first class label or whatever label, later became also, we also used UPS, whatever it was, the right label to get it to Miami. SkyPostal operators would scan that label. Up would pop up all the information we would have sent them. They would figure out what it needed to have to get into Brazil. So 92%, I remember that number, went to Correios of Brazil. 8%, there was parts of the country that were better with private operators. They knew that. That was their expertise. That they killed that. And so then we print a domestic shipping, a Brazilian domestic shipping label that aggregate that along with their other volume, put out one manifest for the bag or box, drop ship into Brazil, clear customs in like 6 hours. Because pre-notification, so that the people were ready for it. They had a big list. They could clear it. Have people. It was big enough that it had dedicated. People didn't sit in the back of a warehouse like one package would. And then it got delivered by the best method. We even got better, refined that process, because if a Brazilian consumer refused it because of customs, the team worked together to even, as soon as it got to Miami, the buyer in Brazil would get a notification to pay customs so that the package was paid in Miami so that it wouldn't go all the way and have to pay to come back. And if they refused it, it was a domestic package. We took it back. And so it was a great system, very innovative for its time. I mean, you just didn't have that anymore. And so that was the solution. It was great for AJ. He got bigger volumes, great for our merchants. Not only did we get it down to 10 to 12 days, which for Brazil turns out was very good, actually less than that sometimes. We also were able to reduce the cost, and I forget the numbers, but it was something going from like $30 down to like $18. Merchant saved about $10. We as a company made a cut on that. AJ made a cut on that, and yet the merchant saves like $10, right? I'm assuming it was $10. You know, the numbers don't hold me to it.
Round numbers, yeah.
Net relative number. So great solution. Today, it's a big part of the business that my previous company does. It's grown. It's had its own world. Now we do it to many countries. But that was what we did with SkyPostal. And of course, it helped SkyPostal. It helped us tremendously. It was a great, it's those kind of things that you'd say win-win, aligned incentives, two companies doing well, creative minds, thinking outside the box. You check many boxes when you do something that innovative, new, different. Now you see more of it, of course. But that was the first time we were aware of a solution like that.
I think it sounds like you guys were really paving the way for a lot of what we take for granted today, where many companies are offering postage printing and, you know, label printing and tracking and international. You guys were the pioneers.
We used to say, we had a slide in our intro when we'd go meet our firsts, right? And we were very proud to have a bunch of firsts. A lot of it just was listening to customers and looking for problems. We enjoyed solving problems. Harry especially. I mean, it was what got him out of bed, probably still does, is solving a problem. So
that's awesome. Well, I'm sure AJ will enjoy listening to this podcast and hearing your side of the story, which is I think which is great, because I think you guys came together and really solved a major problem. You made an international shipment into Brazil from New York look like just a parcel package going to Miami. I mean, this is at a much lower cost and much faster. So, like win-win-win is what I hear from this story. You grew the company. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit. The company has grown 50% year over year. You got the international thing. You're acquiring larger customers, but then it sounds like you guys got acquired. So I'm gonna fast forward to that. And you were acquired by Newell. Later, you were acquired by Stamps.com. I don't know if everyone knows that you guys were acquired by Newell first, but wanted to hear your side of the story on that, and just kind of, you know, I think about an acquisition, right? I mean, this is your baby, after all, right? Yours, Harry's, the other folks that worked at Endicia. How did you make the decision to sell the company, and yeah, how did that come about?
So, you know, when you make a name for yourself, which we were very fortunate to do that, we were being approached probably annually by somebody, some entity, and very amicably, people that we knew, and we weren't interested in selling. We were three co-founders, no outside debt, no outside investors, right? So we were the three of us, really had both control and were profitable. So there was nothing pushing us. What started happening is we were growing fast, but we weren't big enough for some of the big players. they would say, "Oh, if I work with you, I'm going to double your business. That's too much risk for me to work with a small company." And it really manifested itself in international. We're thinking, like I said, solve a problem. What's next? What's next? We're already thinking, how do we grow internationally? How do we grow into Europe? We lost a couple of bids in Europe, which we were more qualified than anybody else, but it was the size of company. So there was an opportunistic, one of our big partners, Dymo, which makes the thermal printers. We knew the founders. We had worked with them. We had a JV with them where we printed stamps on Dymo printers, and they marketed that because they had a more consumer small business arm, and through retail, they got acquired by Newell. So at one point, Newell, reviewing their book, sees that a big part of their plan, their operating, their strategy was to include this postage, and it was differentiated between them and the other thermal label printers. So they approached us. Again, we were not interested in selling. And they said, "Hey, look, if this comes up again, please do talk to us." A year later, we got approached again by a serious person. We mentioned to them, and they came with a very strong offer. And the big part about it is they weren't trying to buy us and let us go, right? We were not interested in exiting. We were interested in growing the business. And they put enough in place where we sold it in mid-2007. I continued to run it for another 8 years, right? And we grew it 6+X in that time. So it was not like we suddenly backed off or anything. It was actually a great sort of opportunity, not your typical, right? Because Newell's a consumer products company, but they were starting a tech group, and there were 4 companies in that tech group. We grew amongst those companies. We had the highest growth, I would say. And by the time 2013, 14 comes along, change in strategy at Newell. We had a great relationship with the C-suite in Atlanta. We had one of those days, an adult discussion. We were looking to grow. We were now at a growth stage where we had really grown. And you get to a point where you start looking, I'm going to have to acquire something. You can't just keep growing. We're still growing double digits every year. And I'm thinking, I think it's time for us to do some M&A. We started dabbling in it, invested in a couple of companies. But we came to an acquisition circa 2013, 14. They were like, you know what? I think it's starting to be more than what Newell was going to do. Had a very great discussion with the executive team, hired a banker. And I think I was given 90 days to raise money to buy the company back. And then after that, run a process, given enough latitude to be part of the decision. And throughout the process, we both looked at, do we take it private? Do we merge with another company? And we had a great relationship with the Stamps.com executive team from the early 2000s. We had longevity. They had longevity. Same, pretty much almost 90% of the team we knew from late 90s. Including some of the board members. And so we had a great relationship. I think I could say today that I think this was the 6th time one of us tried to buy the other, and so 6th time was the charm. And so once we ran the process, we ended up merging with Stamps or being acquired by Stamps. Some people at the exec team call them a merger. Some people call it an acquisition. And then 7 months in, we decided having subsidiaries for this part of the business didn't work, so we merged the two together. You'll see memorabilia called, Stamps Endicia. We started playing around with naming, joined sales teams, marketing, and then at some point, about 8 months in, we merged the management teams too. So that's when I became the chief strategy officer for Stamps, being a little bit off, not the day-to-day, moving out of the day-to-day. Ken McBride was the CEO. You had a public company now, quarterlies, hitting the numbers. And so my role became looking at what's next. I used the general term, what is in a year and a half, what do we need to be doing versus what are we doing today? The only exception to that was taking on the carriers and the postal relationships, because that was a strength of mine and of Endicia. So I ran the carrier relationships, or at that time Postal, and then it grew. And then everything new, which ended up adding M&A to it, because new products, new segments, new markets. Well, anytime you look at those, you start deciding, am I going to build it? Am I going to partner? Am I going to buy? So we didn't have a formal M&A function, even though we had done 4 acquisitions, including within 4 months. I think that's when Shipping Easy, right? your
Yep.
company joined, right? And so I remember being very involved in that process, which was a lot of fun, and was very happy to see us all join arms. But so inherited that function also. So yeah, so that was the process. That was, I think, a long way of answering your question.
So you guys, that's awesome. I love the 6 times is a charm. So it wasn't just like an overnight. Again, not an overnight merger. Hey, let's get together. This was a back and forth for some time, and when the opportunity came, you struck it. Yes, shipping easy. That's where we met, right? Is I was working for Katie May, who's the founder, CEO. She was awesome. She is awesome. She's become a great mentor to me and a good friend. And you guys ended up the stamps, right? Stamps and Endicia acquired shipping easy.
Yep. It was, I think, in the
How involved were
spring.
you in that acquisition? Just curious.
Very
How?
involved. I was extremely involved. Got pulled in the whole. So we didn't have an M&A team, right? As sophisticated as we were, it was just not a cost that we sort of had in the business, and so it was all hands on deck. And being that Shipping Easy was an Endicia partner, I think I had a great relationship with Katie and the team, right? And so everything from the meetings that we had, the management meetings, to really the diligence, end up getting extremely involved and taking over some of the board prep and diligence, which then became, okay, you're going to get M&A too. But it was a little bit off working in that and being very close to it, because we were very close. I mean, it was a very close partnership between Shipping Easy and Endicia. So it was a very natural extension fit. And then, of course, Katie being a fantastic leader to the company was another great fit within the expansion of the management team and expertise in the company. Because if you think traditionally, Endicia was in shipping, but stamps traditionally was mailing and SMB, right? And so you had this evolution of knowledge where we all grew together to where we became. And so having another thought leader in the leadership group, and of course, Katie later became a board member also, right? So it
That's
was
right.
just another natural fit, a great addition to the family. So
All right. So you've during the I guess the 2010s, right? I call it the 2010s. There was a couple acquisitions: ShipStation, Shipping Easy, I think ShipWorks. So there was a few really strong acquisitions, and like you said, there was a lot of synergies. But then, if we fast forward a little bit, the company got acquired, changed, I guess, rebranded, right? First to Octane, and then was still a publicly traded company, and now got acquired and taken private by Thoma Bravo. You left the company. I think you retired, right? You officially retired after many years serving at Endicia and then the greater company, and then eventually Stamps.com, Octane in 2023. Look, multiple acquisitions. Most people would leave after the first, right? It's like if you look at founders, you get the first acquisition, you might stick around for a year or two, and you're out. Like that's kind of the general path. You stuck around for a long time, and you helped them grow. Like, what made you stick around? And then what made you retire?
so just from a timeline, 2021, you see that Thoma Bravo takes Stamps.com private in October 2021. During the process of taking private, the rename happened. So Octane was, I think, a forcing function, or the acquisition probably was a forcing function. We've been looking at renaming the company because Stamps.com had a as a corporate name, not as a product name, was already starting we were starting to question. So Octane was natural, and obviously take private. I stayed on for 2 years after the take private event. So first, what I've asked, many people ask me. So one, 2007 was too early. We really wanted to grow the business. I loved the business. One of my co-founders, within a year, decided to retire, Scott. He never had to work again. He enjoyed it. I think he was burnt out. He was ready. We're good friends till today. Harry and I stayed on through the Stamps.com acquisition. A year into it, Harry left after Stamps.com's acquisition, circa roughly 2006, would be about 16, I would say. One, I love the customers. I felt my responsibility towards the employees, and responsibility was a tough one for me. I always felt sort of, it was very important. A lot of people I hired, I felt responsible for. And then also if you think of Thoma Bravo acquiring Octane, I felt always a duty to sort of be able to grow the business. But I also enjoyed it. I loved the people always. The people that worked at the company, our customers, our partners. And so that one continued, and that one always energized me. I also felt I wanted to hand off to that. I'm going to use the term, maybe it's not the right term, but the next generation, right? And the next set of leaders. It was time. I would use that term even when I ran Endicia. How do you guys obsolete me? We should be thinking that way. Nobody should be just the primary. Yep, I'm the leader, but we should think in terms of obsoleting me. How do we make us grow such that we're not reliant on any one person? So I kept that thought going. And I think when we were taken private, a lot of the executives left. There was obviously a liquidity event, as some people call it, right? And so a lot of folks around me left. I still had that same mindset of, we need to make sure there's the next set of leaders. And so I got involved in that. And really at one point or another, that headquarters moved to Austin. Flying into Austin was one thing. It was starting to be time. So I spent really the last 6 months hiring my replacements, making sure I bring them up to speed, a smooth transition. I've always encouraged people that work for me, if you're going to leave, tell me. I'll work with you. I will help you. Let's just make it smooth. And I felt that I had to sort of do the same. So I told people within 6 months, we had a very natural wind down, hired replacements, worked with them even after I left. I had stayed in touch if anybody needed that sort of smooth transition. And I still stay in touch with some of the folks that work for me. But then I retired from the company. Things I loved, I still do. I'm a board advisor. I mentor and fortunate enough to advise a bunch of startups, founders in our space. I'm on some boards of great companies that are trying to see the next thing globally, anything from Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Europe, and the US. So I always had a global sense to what we did and worked globally. And I feel very fortunate that I'm still able to do some of that without working as a full-timer. But that was the same thing I took in my last 6 months, making sure sort of a smooth transition, people were in place. And to a certain degree, we had grown big enough that not one person should have been that critical, but it was also still part of my mindset to make sure it was smooth.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. Succession is important, and you want to make sure you leave it in good hands and things don't fall apart. It sounds like that was is very important to you to do and to finish the job and to make sure that the next, you call it the next generation, right? The next set of leaders are carrying the flag forward. So I think it's also great advice for anyone that's listening that's going through this process right now. Like you want to leave a legacy, right? You want to leave something in good hands because you want it to succeed going forward. Okay, so I gotta ask you, because we're like, we're long into the conversation, and I'm sure if anyone's watching on YouTube or anyone, they see you wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Okay, so why is this guy wearing a Hawaiian shirt to the podcast, on the podcast? And but anyone that knows you, knows that this is like your daily work attire. Okay, your daily attire, and you love it. How did that start? How did you start like the tradition of wearing the Hawaiian shirt? And like what does it represent to you?
So it's really funny. It's like everything else. You kind of slip into it, right? So I was always not a white shirt guy. Even my first job, I showed up at the office without a tie. Literally my first job. I'm 20 years old. I finished undergrad. I show up my first day at work without a tie. I was sent home. So I was never somebody who dressed up. So just to be fair, okay? So we're starting with Endicia. We're casual. We're in Silicon Valley, jeans, flip-flops. I wasn't a flip-flop guy. It took me a while to get into flip-flops, but I was very casual. Not a white shirt guy, but you had to wear a tie back then in the 80s. And I'd go meet with big clients. I'd wear a tie reluctantly, but not a white shirt. I had purple, I had pink, I liked color. So that's really the genesis, is plain was not me. It was never, even high school, I was the guy, I liked color. Don't ask why, I just liked color. And so it started that way. And then, I'm on the West Coast, right? I live in Silicon Valley. We do our first, I think, Hawaiian trip. I'm like, oh, I like these color shirts. I get 1 or 2 shirts. Next trip, a couple of shirts. And then, I don't know, this started after I started running the company, right? After we sold, even in a corporate environment, I was like, I would go to my board meetings. I was like, okay, everybody's wearing the black suit with a tie or blue suit with a tie. And I had no tie. That was not going to happen at that point, unless I had to. And I was going to wear purple, pink, blue, red, whatever, nice color. I mean, if I found a shirt that had colors, I'd buy all 6. And so I think it started that way. And then when you had color mixing, then the Hawaiian shirts became natural. I call Hawaiian beachwear, Caribbean. You can give it a lot of names, right? We use Hawaiian in a term. But I became a big fan. And, slowly, I think my kids call it an addiction. And then, I don't know, I want to say circa 2010, 11, they started coming up with long sleeve ones. So I started calling them my board shirts. And once a year, you'd find literally a flowered shirt that was long sleeve with nice collar. So I started getting into the dressy Hawaiian, to the point where our board meetings at Stamps, I remember Ken looking, once I was cuddled up, I was cold. We were on next to having a board dinner. It was next to the ocean. We're waiting. And he's like, oh, you're not dressed, you're not wearing a Hawaiian shirt. I'm like, no, here it is. So it became part of our thing. When I went to Europe, I remember asking once a global postal operator, you want me to be the keynote speaker? What do you think? Do you want me to do it? He's like, no, we expect you this way now. So it was interesting to see, but I always liked it. Number one, color. I don't take myself seriously. I take my work very seriously. I think it's fun. I like to interject fun. I think it made me feel good. It was a conversation. I'm a social guy, right? So yeah, I could tell you many reasons, but it just evolved. I like it. I enjoy it. And now it's the opposite. I mean, I walked in once with a colored shirt, not a flowered shirt, I remember, at headquarters, and I got the call out, something wrong. It's now it lives alone, right? So yeah, I love it. I kind of enjoy that stuff. So
yeah, that's awesome. It's like it's become your signature, and
it's the brand,
and that is how people recognize you.
Yeah.
They expect it as absolutely expect it going forward. You talked a little bit about retiring and starting to advise other companies, sitting on boards. Now you sit on the boards of companies like Ship Hero and Tusk Logistics. Like, what do you enjoy most about this phase of your career now? You've been successful, and now you sold your company. You're helping founders scale.
People. I'm always a people person. Love the founders, and background is I was always a growth guy. Start with growth at a good cost. I wasn't a cost first person. I was a growth person. So I like to think and as a founder, certain founders are good at startup, but not the next scale, or scale A, not B, not C, not D, right? I was fortunate enough to go through multiple stages, and fortunate enough to do well in those stages. And I like to think I can help that founder-led company go through that same transition. Love working with smart people. Love being a sounding board. If I can help them make one good decision a year, avoid one bad decision a year. Sometimes it's just a good conversation. It can be quote unquote lonely at the top sometimes, right? Depending on who you have on your team and the different stage company. So I enjoy that part. I enjoy staying in the industry, right? It's something that I thrive on. And so, yeah, if I can help these companies in one way or another get to that next stage, it's very gratifying. We talked about when I left, hey, let's give it to the next generation. This is also part of that. And I'm also involved in charities, next generation concept of students getting out of community colleges, universities, getting the kids to get into the workforce for my charity work. But this is very, very different, obviously, and a whole different level. But that same concept of could I be helpful? And it makes me feel good. I feel rewarded. And hopefully I'm helping these leaders of today and tomorrow get to that next stage also, and hopefully get to their dreams too.
Well said. I think it's good. It's great to be helpful. I think that's a good purpose
It feels good.
in your retirement. So as you're helping these companies, obviously they're solving some of the same challenges I think they're conceptually that you went through in your career. How do we grow? How do we acquire customers? How do we stay afloat, right? If we're running out of money, how do we find new markets, etc. But they no longer have to figure out how to print a shipping label. Okay, so that's behind us. Curious, now that we're entering, what I think is like this AI and robotics era, right? The next era. What are you seeing? What are you most excited about? And is there anything that's given you some hesitation?
So I like to think of, AI, you can take it to A to Z, right? It's a big thing. You could say it's equivalent to, when the internet came out, we had a lot of predictions. Or I heard when the first container, literally in 1956, they didn't have, I didn't realize this. It wasn't until 1956 that the concept of container on a ship came out, right? You see these revolutionary steps in our world. I'm excited always about solving an X problem or making somebody's life easier, a merchant, a customer. And so I look at things like AI as another step function that if used smartly can take out another friction point that we have, whether it's, finding a lost package, filing a claim, and simplicity. Or I know that ShipHero does something pretty amazing. It's called AI picking, where it now can schedule your route, how you walk in a warehouse to pick materials, right? That's pretty cool. You can suddenly save 20% of your time because dynamically, depending on the orders that came into it, you can change your route, right? Things like, expanding the carrier mix, what you see with Tusk, I think you mentioned, or you see some of the AI stuff that companies like Shippo are doing. I like to see those, we're not standing still, right? Because the merchants deserve that, right? These are guys that are trying to grow, trying to survive. I mean, you've worked in this world, right? We want those guys to survive, because if they do and grow, they're going to do more business with this ecosystem of logistics providers. Let's call our wider ecosystem, whether you're a 3PL, a software provider, a carrier. You need parcels in the world to be able to run your business. To do that, you need to have buyers and sellers, right? Without that, your business doesn't exist, right? And it's simple, but the more we can do things to encourage that and take friction out of the system, because the physical package still has to get delivered. What we do as software guys is facilitate, make visibility better, label prints faster, the tracking, we make it a better tracking experience versus a tracking number. We do these things, and these continue to evolve. And I think that delights me. The buying methods. Look at social buying today, right? We used to buy on eBay. Then it became, no, it has to be professional on Amazon. Now we got TikTok, or we've got, back in the pandemic, some stores would have live videos in the stores and selling. Well, now it's social selling. It's live streaming. So you've got this new way of selling. You have to adjust to it. Agentic shopping right now, you're starting to hear that, right? You start seeing, do I search and buy at the same time? So those things keep everybody on their toes. And I think that's exciting to see the evolution of the industry and having it move forward. Again, back to that next generation now, what are we going to see? So that excites me. Excites me to see that energy. I'm looking forward to seeing more partnerships. I think we're going through a bunch of different stages of, do we work together or do we isolate? And I think that you said, what gives me pause? I saw some of that a year ago where there was isolations. We're still seeing a bit off the, I'm not going to carry your packages, I'll carry those packages. I think there's a bit of that. Do you want to partner or compete? We're also going to see in the agentic side, right? Who owns the consumer? Is it the AI? Is it the seller? Is it the platform? There's going to be some of that balancing out. End of the day, solution providers still have to get the package to the customer, right? I had one
Exactly.
interview when drones came out, and 60 Minutes had an interview with Bezos, and it was a Sunday. Monday, I had my interview, and the editor asked me the question: are you worried about drones? Is that going to change everything? And it took me by surprise because it wasn't planned. And I was like, oh, I don't think so. I said, as long as it has an Endicia package on it, I don't care. It's a plane, a man, a drone. It still has to get there. So I think our roles may change, but we have to adjust as the market changes. And that's something I would send to any of the CEOs I work with or the founders, is you have to keep thinking that way. Change is just natural. How we adjust to it as both providers and players in the industry is how this market evolves and grows. So it's kind of fun. I think that's the fun part. Some people keeps them up at night, but that's okay.
I mean, this could be one of the most fun periods, right? That we're going to be going through. And like you said, drones. I mean, that pretty cool. It's a new way to get packages from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And I live in Austin, Texas. There's a company here that's starting to deliver packages underground through tunnels.
There you go.
So you think the sky, underground, over the road. There's going to be there's multiple dimensions now to deliver those packages. It's really exciting times we live in. So I've had you on for a while. I always like, I think I always like to close the podcast. And by the way, thank you for sharing the story. Before I move on to the last question, thank you for sharing your story. I don't know if a lot of people have heard this story. I think it's an important story because it is important to the industry, important to how things kind of got started, right? And it's always important to understand your history, kind of to think about like, where am I today and the future, but it's important to understand your history and how things evolved. But as you're, experienced a lot as a founder, as a board member, now you're advising companies, like you've seen what works and what doesn't work. So my last question to you is like, and it might be a tough one, but like, is there a recurring piece of advice that you just find yourself giving because it just proves true and true again, no matter what decade or what we're going through?
I even use this with my kids. I was thinking about this when you mentioned it. I use the term, and I learned this from a client of mine during the management consulting phase. Don't get a case of the greeds and the stupids. Sometimes people catch and you do stupid things. I also say don't do stupid, but don't get a case of the greeds and the stupids. Sometimes you forget yourself, and I think we have to be grounded. I think I said this earlier in the podcast, the customer point of view, always remember it's your customer that pays you. It humbles us a bit. We sometimes, 5 people get in a room, they get a spreadsheet going, they come out going, woo, we have a new thing. You have to go talk to the customer, right? You might be convinced, and 5 people have come up to me and said, look, all 5 of us agree, this is great. I'm like, great. I don't think so, but I'm not the customer. Go talk to the customer. Customers always is an interesting point. The don't do stupid. It's amazing to me how people forget that. Just have that little voice in your head saying, yeah, you're bordering on stupid. Don't do stupid. Now, I'm not saying people are stupid. I'm saying don't do stupid. It's just a terminology. Communicate. I'm amazed how hard it is for some people to communicate amongst each other, and then work with people you like. Life's too short. I love my management team. I love my team, and we grew it carefully. We took our time, and I don't think I could have done it without the team I worked with. Definitely could not. My partners, my team, always made life better, right? And so, anyway, you asked me for one. I cheated a bit, but I'm very verbose, right?
No, it's a good one. I think it's a good one. Again, I asked a tough one because it's like what lasts throughout the decades, right? What's always recurring and what always keeps coming back. And thanks for sharing that. Well, I mean, thanks again for joining me on the podcast and sharing your story. Where, if people want to connect with you, learn more about like the companies you're, supporting right now through boards or advisory, or maybe they want to have you on their board or get some advice, like how can they connect with you?
So I'm always on LinkedIn, right? It seems to be the generic way we all find each other, right? So there's not a lot of means. If you can spell my last name, then you're dead on. You're gonna get me or my two sons. But if you spell my first name, you're already halfway there, and you have Endicia spelled correctly, which is a challenge. You'll probably find me. So yeah, or contact you. People talk to you.
Sure.
You know how to go to hold me, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, look, you contact me on LinkedIn. I have my sole proprietorship, C-Sky Advisors. I'm at cskyadvisors.com if you want to email me directly. But LinkedIn is just a great spot. You'll get to sort of look at who the heck I am too. So and anyway, I look forward to meeting that next generation, next set of people, and hopefully together, we can get some things to move forward for folks. So
100%. And I look forward to, in the future interviewing the next generation, right? The next, that creates that technology that's going to revolutionize things.
And there's a lot out there. This is what's
Totally.
really fun too, Marie. If you look, I always said the next 5 years are exciting. I would say that every year, and I think we can say that again. And I think the industry you're in, the industry I came from, there's a high level of activity for an industry that you would think it's parcels, but everybody, and especially it got supercharged during COVID, right? So I think we have a next generation of very creative people, hardworking, smart. So I think it's exciting, and I think you could keep a big list of people you could talk to. So I'm excited to hear the next podcast too. So Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. It's always fun to connect with colleagues, good friends, extended family, as we call ourselves, right?
Totally.
So
Totally.
It's great.
Well, thank you. Well, we'll wrap it here. Listeners, as always, subscribe to Logistics Remix channel on YouTube for more conversations like this that make sense of shipping. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. I know I did. I think it was an awesome conversation. Give us a like, and thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Goodbye, everybody.